In this session, we're going to be looking at frames that have been submitted to Framefixers.com because of lenses that are popping out of the frame. The first thing that we do when we're looking at a frame that is submitted for chronic lens popping out is to first of all identify correctly the edging that is on the lens. One would think that the first thing to look at is the profile of the lens, but what we do first is we identify the edging. And by edging we mean that not all lenses have the same edge profile. There is most commonly a lens that has a fairly even, steep, almost a barn roof shape to it, like number 3. But you can have a rounded one, you can have one that comes to a straight point, you can have a barn roof in which there's a double hip at the top, and that fits into the receiver channel that grabs the lens, and that's what's critical about this. More frequently, sports glasses, for some reason, tend to have the lens with one very steep cut on one side and then an elongated cut going away on the other side. And then there's true flat bottom lenses, although these are not as common as they used to be, with planes going away on both sides. Now the critical thing here is to determine what the profile cut of the lens is, and then look at the receiver. Now in this case, for example, the receiver is, you may not be able to see this one exactly, but this particular lens here is number 3. It's got 2 abrupt sides, then a slight cant, and then a slightly rounded point at the end. And that is, in fact, what the receiver has, what the channel material that receives the lens is shaped like in order to receive this lens. Now, why do they pop out? Well, the first thing that we do, of course, is look at profile. Is the profile of the lens and the profile of the channel a duplicate? One of the problems is that at the extreme end of any lens, there tends to also be the most extreme example of its curvature, and its curvature at the end here produces a challenge for the channel to retain it, and that's one of the spots where it tends to pop out. So the first thing to do is to look at the channel and the lens together to see if in fact the profile of one mimics the profile of the other. And all of these things obviously can be adjusted. What we normally do is remove the arms, take the frame front, profile it, make sure that in fact the profile of the channel matches it, make sure the curvature, if you look at it this way, let's look at the one that's installed, make sure that the curvature is a duplicate. You'll notice on this one that as I rotate it, the curvature of the lens rotates quite dramatically away from a flat plane, here especially. Here not so much. Here again. And you can see where the opportunity for a lens to pop out would be if that channel doesn't follow the curvature of the lens exactly. Having said that, assuming that we have identified the type of channel on the lens, the receiver channel in the frame itself, and we've set the lens in place, we check to see if there's any free play, if the lens itself actually has a zero tolerance fit, and that's critically important. There should be no play. Once the screw blocks, right here, are drawn together, the screw blocks should be a no daylight fit, where there's no gap between the two, and at the point at which they close, they should close on the lens without any strain. Now what you don't want is you don't want a hoop of channel around a lens that when you screw down on the screw blocks, especially in polycarbonate lenses, where they'll take quite a spring, they'll actually be kind of spring-loaded in there, and then at the first opportunity and the flexing of the frame, they'll pop out. These happen to be glass lenses, so that's not a problem with these. So we've identified our profile, our channel profile, our perimeter match, our curvature match, And now we're looking to see if there's a zero tolerance fit for that lens in this particular frame, which there is. If it's too large in a frame like this, we can machine the screw blocks to take a little material out of the gap, close it down, and it becomes a zero fit. If it doesn't close, then we need to lengthen the perimeter of the hoop, or we need to re-edge the lens to match exactly to a zero tolerance fit, the hoop and the lens. So that's metal frames to begin with. Let's move on to plastic frames, same problem. In plastic frames, with plastic lenses especially, you have a great deal of play, and you also have quite a bit of difference in expansion coefficient between the lens itself, which tends to be polycarbonate, possibly C39, and the frame, which in this case is Zyle. When the lens keeps popping out, what we look for, once again, we identify the profile of the plastic, the channel that's going to receive it, to make sure that they are a match. Obviously, if you have a channel that is cut like this and a lens that's shaped like this, it's not going to seat. It's going to perch on the top of the channel, waiting to pop out. So having addressed those two, we check, and again, look at the curvature. Just look at the way in which this lens angles itself as it travels left to right, and also top to bottom. Lots of opportunity there for one little spot in the lens to be stressed tremendously at one point and pop out. We get all kinds of indicators, for example, where people say, well, you know, my lens never pops out until when I go motorcycle riding, I put my frames on and I pull my helmet on and the lens pops out. So obviously there's a problem in which the frame itself flexes, as this one clearly does, and the lens pops out. The solution for that is a more positive fit of the lens in the perimeter. If we're trying to make the perimeter tighter, there is a material that comes in spool form that can actually lie in the channel, which is a clear nylon material, which then when you do insert the plastic lens, it's in there much, much more firmly and positively locked in. If in fact the lens is a little bit too big, same answer. We can reprofile the lens, remove material at a critical point. Very frequently that point is this one right here, where the lens has an extreme curvature. Again, let me back that one out. Has an extreme curvature at that point, and that's an opportunity for pressure and for it to pop out. Now, an interesting combination of the two of these, which we get in quite frequently, is a frame that's vintage. It's pre-Zyle. It's something from the 60s or possibly a little earlier. And it has a glass lens and a plastic frame. And as it ages, suddenly the lens either pops out or even snaps the plastic surround going around the lens. What's happening here is the early plastic frames were not stable the way modern Zyle is, or modern nylon. And as the matrix aged, it naturally shrank. It also did something called potato chipping, in which it actually got a wave in the body of it, which changed its form and how it gripped the lens. So if you can imagine compounding the curvature of a frame and the opposing curvature of a lens that has remained stable, because the glass doesn't change in width, doesn't change in length, doesn't change in curvature, but the plastic has. And what happens here is it either breaks the hoop or the lens keeps popping out. And we'll frequently see them come in where the lens is gapped out at the top like that, no longer fits the shape of the frame, in which case we have to do some frame shaping. And there's also the matter of the frame now being smaller in perimeter than the glass that it originally hosted, and we have to make the channel by going in with channeling tools, which by the way look exactly like this on the edge. They're discs, they're mounted on shafts, and we go in and we re-establish the channel to make them deep and appropriate to the actual edging on the lens itself. Having done that, we set them in place, and that generally takes care of the problem. Once again, these problems are exacerbated when the frame itself is flexed. When that happens, the lens, normally at its most pinched point, the point at which it has the most pressure and the most irregularity from a flat plane in the curvature of the lens, and that's where they pop out. And we attend to those, and that's something that we do fairly successfully, fairly frequently.